Hey YouTube, Sister Danger here. I was having a lazy afternoon, kind of just cruising through videos and reading, other such things, but I could not get out of my head this business from the reasonable questions for anti-SJWs, and that guy was like, "What is it with you people and skulls?" And I thought to myself, during the course of watching his video, well, I'm not really pro SJW, although I'm not sure that I would wholly subscribe to anti-SJWism, but do I actually have a lot of skulls laying around my house? Are skulls like this thing? So I decided to go around my house and gather up all the skulls that I could find just to see whether or not I had a bunch of skulls. So I thought I would share with you the skulls that are in my house laying around. And as it turns out, I have tons of skulls. I'm swimming in them. So, no, I'm not actually swimming in skulls. But I do have some pretty cool skulls, so I thought I would share them all with you today. I'll start with the simplest ones first. So this little guy is just kind of a Day of the Dead. I love to collect creatures, as I call them. They're sort of my menagerie of creatures in the creature collection. And he's sort of got this little Day of the Dead skull on a kind of Wookiee looking thing. And so I love him. He's cute. And then I have the Cheshire Cat, which is more like an entire skeletal animal from the Alice video game. I love this guy. This skull, which is this Goblin Queen sort of Day of the Dead skull, and an artist friend of mine made this and gifted it to me. She did all of the stuff that's added in there. So, skull necklace. And then I have this skull here on the front of this book, and this was an original skull in the middle, and then it was sculpted here on the side. Now, the thing about this one, which I really particularly like, this is an 800-page tome that I actually personally hand bound. I made this book, and then as a collaborative piece of art, my friend did the outside, the cover on this sort of, I'll try to give you a close-up so you can see, but he did the outside cover, and I did all of the inside. So that is largely the extent of my skull collection, I think. I do have some other cool things. I've got this giant bull snake in a jar, and this is pretty cool. The top of it says, Kemenitri. Some of you guys are gonna get that joke. Since I am in a sharing mood, here are a few other cool props and books and things, primarily books that I have either hand covered or completely hand bound or otherwise made. I hope you guys find them interesting. They are just a part of the cool collection of things that I have in my house. This first book here is Goethe's Faust, and it's an old copy of it that I found and then recovered, and I used this sort of textured paper that was all kind of red and fiery for the outside. The interesting part about this book actually is that centerpiece you see there with the X on it, that is a reproduced clip from a prop that I made. The prop was supposed to be a contract with the devil. It was for a film, and I actually have the original prop here. I keep it in this ginormo book that I bound forever and ever ago. And this is the original prop. It's kind of fragile. I did all that calligraphy onto this parchment, and then we made it all sort of burnt and looking, and then did the bloody X there for the personal signature at the bottom. So that's a pretty fun book that has a secret little lore behind it. This one I called the Anatomy book, and I it was already a bound book that I recovered, and I covered it with gauze, and I put down kind of the center of it. You can see there this sort of open, bleeding, gashy wound, and then on the inside I had this really fine Italian paper that had these sort of anatomical skulls, and I put that on the inside and other bony body parts. And then I actually used surgical scissors to create the clasp for this particular book. This book here, I used a cool human spine to go down the spine. The outside is covered in leather that I riveted through, and the writing that you see on the book, I actually handwrit all of this using red ink and a glass quill and pen. That's actually my handprint that is on the book. The words that you see on the book, should any of you feel free to try to enlarge them and read them. It's actually a passage from the Marquis de Sade's Justine, where he is talking about virtue. This book here is actually Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and it has a skull. Actually, it's a bird skull on the front. It is recovered in this antique silk that I found and then riveted to the front, and then I attached that skull, and it's got a piece of cord that goes through the center of the skull's nose area in order to tie the book shut. This guy here is just a sort of deformed anomaly head that I made in a jar as a prop piece. This book here is the actual Malleus Maleficarum by Kramer and Sprenger, also known as the Hammer of Witches. It was one of the official books of the Inquisition that they used in order to determine who was a witch and provided the procedures by which to do so, and then by which to prosecute and kill them. So it's kind of a dark book. I did the outer cover here, and I sculpted the little tentacles and painted them and everything. The center piece there is a sort of this gaping maw that has a bunch of tiny little nails around the inside, and the picture that is on the inside of that is a tiny little excerpt that I blew up from the famous painting Hell by Hieronymus Bosch. This book here is actually one of the first books that I ever hand-bound when I was first learning how to do it. It's pretty near and dear to my heart, and it's still in my private collection. On the cover is a sort of collage of photos from real homicide scenes of actual dead people, taken from the book Death Scenes, which is a collection of homicide photos by an LAPD detective. And in the middle of that, the one picture that is in color is the picture of Ophelia from the Pre-Raphaelite painter Hughes. On the back of this book is a page from the newspaper of the personal ads that is covered then with strips of headlines talking about murders or other such violent crimes, and then that which looks like code is actually excerpts from letters of the Zodiac Killer. The cover was sort of meant to put into contrast the beauty of life with the ugliness of death. This book here is just a recovered journal that I did. It's covered in leather, and then I sort of made these kind of pockmark puncture holes using a needle and some thick thread to give the impression of a skin that was being punctured and then sewn through. The hourglass that I used for the spine was kind of meant to indicate that, our time in life is running out, or at least we're on a timeline. And the center bodily structure of this particular book is actually taken from the painting Saturno by Francisco Goya. So this bit here is actually a book that has this piece of leather on the front, which I used a wood burning tool to write those words, bound in human flesh. It's actually leather, so I guess it's technically flesh. The book that you see to the right there was inside of this box, and I sort of tried to make it this decaying fleshy color that had been sutured through around the perimeter of the book. I made this to be a prop, which was then sold. This last book here is also very near and dear to my heart. It is titled Don't Judge, and it's in my personal collection. I couldn't ever bring myself to fully part with this book. You can see on the outer cover, it's covered in grocery bag paper, and then I just have all these little bits of trash. There's a tin can that I cut up and then etched into the words "Don't Judge" as the title of the book, and then riveted those onto the front. The spine is this crooked spine. I hand bound this whole book, and so down the center I used this knotted rope that I made purposefully crooked, and then I covered it with leather. And this book was my tribute to Joseph Merrick, who is the Elephant Man, as he is more commonly known. And so the inside of this book I made very beautiful. I used this coffee leaf paper that is parchment-like and really fine printed pearlized paper. And on the inside cover is a poem that was written by Joseph Merrick, and then I surrounded that with some very nice satin printed ribbon. And then on the back cover, which you don't see here, is actually a picture of Joseph Merrick's real life physician throughout the vast majority of his life. And I just find his story so tragic, because he was terribly deformed on the outside, but was this very beautifully minded person. And in stark contrast to his ugliness and deformity, his physician was this really handsome Victorian-styled guy. And the irony of that just never really escaped me. And so I made this book, and then after I made it, I was like, his story is too, makes me all sappy to talk about. So anyway, I sympathize greatly with his story and believe that you should never judge a book by its cover. What's that, you say? Oh, right. The skull reminded me to remind you guys that if you like the things that I produce here, you can support me by contributing to my Patreon. I will put that in the little bar, and you might find that it is quite a different Patreon page than this. This is definitely a hobby page of mine, but contributing to my Patreon definitely will help keep content, enable content to continue coming here. Anyway, thank you everybody, and have a great weekend.